Hello everybody, I hope you're all having a wonderful day or night, whatever time it happens to be, wherever you happen to be. My name is Jay, and welcome to episode 8 of History's Hangnails, the podcast where we deep dive on bizarre events and mysteries from our past. Today's episode takes us back to the beginnings of the 20th century. In 1895, on Eilean Moor in the Flannan Isles, within the Hebrides off the northwestern coast of Scotland, construction began on a lighthouse. Designed by David Allen Stevenson for the Northern Lighthouse Board, the structure stood 23 metres high, and including the building itself, landing docks, stairs, and railway tracks, cost £1,899. All materials had to be hauled up the 45-metre cliffs directly from the supply boats, with a further £3,526 being spent on a shore station at Brestclit, a small village community on the Isle of Lewis. The purpose of the railway tracks was to facilitate the transport of supplies for the keepers and fuel for the light, for which they used paraffin at the time, up the steep gradients from the landings by means of a cable-hauled railway. This was powered by a small steam engine in a shed adjoining the lighthouse. A track descended from the main building in a westerly direction, then curved around to the south. In the approximate centre of the island, the rails forked in two directions by means of a set of hand-operated controls, referred to as a railroad switch, turnout, or set of points. One branch of the railway continued in its curvature to head eastward to another landing on the southeast corner of the island, while the other, slightly shorter branch curved back in the opposite direction toward the western landing, situated in a small inlet on the island's south coast. The final approaches to the landing stages were steeper again. The cable was guided around the curves by pulleys set between the rails, and a line of posts set outside the inner rail to prevent it from going too far astray. All cargo was loaded and transported using a small, four-wheeled bogie, a modular chassis or framework that carries a wheel set attached to a vehicle. Construction was completed in 1899, and the lighthouse was lit for the first time on December 7. On December 15, 1900, on a routine passage from Philadelphia to Leith in the north of Edinburgh in Scotland, a steamer ship named the Arctur noted in its log that the lamp of the Flannan Isles lighthouse was not operational. When the ship docked in Leith on December 18, the sighting was passed on to the Northern Lighthouse Board. The relief vessel for the lighthouse, the Hesperus, was unable to sail out on December 20 as originally planned due to inclement weather, and did not reach the island until December 26. On arrival, the crew of the Hesperus and the relief keeper travelling with them found that the flagstaff had no flag, and none of the usual provision boxes had been left on the landing stage for restocking. The Eilean Moor Lighthouse employed 3 keepers at this time. Principal keeper James Ducat, second assistant Thomas Marshall, and covering the position of the original first assistant keeper William Ross, who was off duty on sick leave, was an occasional keeper, Donald MacArthur. When stationed at the lighthouse, only 2 keepers were to be on duty at once, with the third in reserve in case of an emergency, yet there was no one to greet them at the dock. What follows here are 2 reports of what the relief team discovered upon investigating the rest of the island. The first of these is a telegram sent from the master of the Hesperus on December 26, 1900. It reads, "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The three keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Fired a rocket, but, as no response was made, managed to land more, who went up to the station but found no keepers there. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. Night coming on, we could not wait to make something as to their fate. I have left Moore, MacDonald, Buoymaster, and 2 seamen on the island to keep the light burning until you make other arrangements. Will not return to Oban until I hear from you. I have repeated this wire to Muirhead in case you are not at home. I will remain at the telegraph office tonight until it closes, if you wish to wire me. Master, Hesperus." The second of these reports was a letter sent by Joseph Moore, the assistant keeper who was to relieve one of the 3 on the island. It read, "Sir, it was with deep regret I wish you to learn the very sad affair that has taken place here during the past fortnight, namely, the disappearance of my 2 fellow lightkeepers, Mr. Ducat and Mr. Marshall, together with the occasional keeper, Donald MacArthur, from off this island. As you are aware, the relief was made on the 26th. That day, as on other relief days, we came to anchorage under Flannan Islands, and not seeing the lighthouse flag flying, we thought they did not perceive us coming. The steamer's horn was sounded several times. Still, no reply. At last, Captain Harvey deemed it prudent to lower a boat and land a man if it was possible. I was the first to land, leaving Mr. McCormack and his men in the boat till I should return from the lighthouse. I went up, and on coming to the entrance gate, found it closed. I made for entrance door, leading to the kitchen and storeroom, found it also closed, and the door inside that, but the kitchen door itself was open. On entering the kitchen, I looked at the fireplace, and saw that the fire was not lighted for some days. I then entered the rooms in succession, found the beds empty, just as they left them in the early morning. I did not take time to search further, for I only too well knew something serious had occurred. I darted out and made for the landing. When I reached there, I informed Mr. McCormack that the place was deserted. He, with some of the men, came up second time, so as to make sure, but unfortunately, the first impression was only too true. Mr. McCormack and myself proceeded to the light room, where everything was in proper order. The lamp was cleaned, the fountain full, blinds on the windows, etc. We left and proceeded on board the steamer. On arrival, Captain Harvey ordered me back again to the island, accompanied with Mr. MacDonald, the buoymaster, A. Campbell, and A. Lamont, who were to do duty with me till timely aid should arrive. We went ashore and proceeded up to the light room and lighted the light in the proper time that night and every night since. The following day, we traversed the island from end to end, but still nothing to be seen to convince us how it happened. Nothing appears touched at East Landing to show that they were taken from there. Ropes are all in their respective places in the shelter, just as they were left after the relief on the 7th. On the west side, it is somewhat different. We had an old box halfway up the railway for holding west landing mooring ropes and tackle, and it was gone. Some of the ropes, it appears, got washed out of it. They lie strewn on the rocks near the crane. The crane itself is safe. The iron railings along the passage connecting the railway with footpath to landing and started from their foundation and broken in several places. Also, railing round crane and handrail for making mooring rope fast for boat is entirely carried away. Now, there is nothing to give us an indication that it was there the poor men lost their lives, only that Mr. Marshall has his sea boots on and oilskins. Also, Mr. Ducat has his sea boots on. He had no oilskin, only an old waterproof coat, and that is away. Donald MacArthur has his wearing coat left behind him, which shows, as far as I know, that he went out in shirt sleeves. He never used any other coat on previous occasions, only the one I am referring to. Mr. J. Moore, Assistant Lightkeeper, Flannan Islands Lighthouse, 28 December 1900. To summarise, neither the captain of the Hesperus nor the Relief saw any flag flying, and though the ship's horn was sounded several times, there was no response. The main gate, access door, and storeroom door were closed, but the kitchen door was open. The state of the fireplace indicated that a fire had not been lit for at least a few days, and all 3 beds were made as they would have been left after the keepers woke up. The captain and assistant keeper determined that the lighthouse had been deserted, but upon reaching the light room, they found the lamp glass had been cleaned, the blinds were closed, and other than it not being lit, everything else was in proper order. Nothing had been touched at the east landing, and all ropes were in their respective places in the shelter, but on the west landing, an old box used to hold mooring ropes and tackle was nowhere to be seen. Some of the iron railings along the outer passages were broken and torn from the concrete, as well as the railing around the cargo crane and the mooring handrails, which had been completely carried away. They noted also that 2 of the missing keepers would have been wearing their sea boots, oilskin and waterproof coats respectively, and that the other would have been wearing no coat at all. A third report, including more detail after a thorough investigation, was submitted by Robert Muirhead on January 8, 1901, and reads as follows. On receipt of Captain Harvey's telegram on 26 December 1900, reporting that the 3 keepers on Flannan Islands, James Ducat, Principal, Thomas Marshall, Second Assistant, and Donald MacArthur, Occasional Keeper, doing duty for William Ross, First Assistant on sick leave, had disappeared and that they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned, I made the following arrangements with the Secretary for the temporary working of the station. James Ferrier, Principal Keeper, was sent from Stornoway Lighthouse to Tiumpan Head Lighthouse, and John Milne, Principal Keeper at Tiumpan Head, was sent to take temporary charge at Flannan Islands. Donald Jack, the Second Assistant Storekeeper, was also dispatched to Flannan Islands, the intention being that these 2 men, along with Joseph Moore, the Third Assistant at Flannan Islands, who was ashore when the accident took place, should do duty pending permanent arrangements being made. I also proceeded to Flannan Islands, where I was landed along with Milne and Jack early on the 29th. after satisfying myself that everything connected with the light was in good order, and that the men landed would be able to maintain the light, I proceeded to ascertain, if possible, the cause of the disaster, and also took statements from Captain Harvey and Mr. McCormack, the second mate of the Hesperus, Joseph Moore, the third assistant keeper, Flannan Islands, and Alan MacDonald, buoy master. And the following is the result of my investigations. The Hesperus arrived at Flannan Islands for the purpose of making ordinary relief about noon Wednesday, 26 December, and as neither signals were shown, nor any of the usual preparations for landing made, Captain Harvey blew both the steam whistle and the siren to call the attention of the keepers. As this had no effect, he fired a rocket, which also evoked no response, and a boat was lowered and sent ashore to the east landing, with Joseph Moore, assistant keeper. When the boat reached the landing, there being still no signs of the keepers, the boat was backed into the landing, and with some difficulty, Moore managed to jump ashore. When he went up to the station, he found the entrance gate and outside doors closed. The clock stopped, no fire lit, and looking into the bedrooms, he found the beds empty. He became alarmed at this and ran down to the boat and informed Mr. McCormack, and one of the seamen managed to jump ashore and with Moore made a thorough search of the station, but could discover nothing. They returned to the ship and informed Captain Harvey, who told Moore he would have to return to the island to keep the light going pending instructions, and called for volunteers from his crew to assist in this. He met with a ready response, and 2 seamen, Lamont and Campbell, were selected, with Mr. MacDonald, the buoy master who was on board, also offering his services, which were accepted, and Moore, MacDonald, and these 2 seamen were left in charge of the light while Captain Harvey returned to Brestclete and telegraphed an account of the disaster to the secretary. The men left on the island made a thorough search in the first place of the station, and found that the last entry on the slate had been made by Mr. Ducat, the principal keeper, on the morning of Saturday, 15 December. The lamp was crimmed, the oil fountains and canteens were filled up, and the lens and machinery cleaned, which proved that the work of the 15th had been completed. The pots and pans had been cleaned and the kitchen tidied up, which showed that the man who had been acting as cook had completed his work, which goes to prove that the men disappeared on the afternoon which was received, after news of the disaster had been published, that Captain Holman had passed the Flannan Islands in the steamer Arctur at midnight on the 15th and could not observe the light. He felt satisfied that he should have seen it. On the Thursday and Friday, the men made a thorough search over and round the island, and I went over the ground with them on Saturday. Everything at the east landing place was in order, and the ropes which had been coiled and stored there on the completion of the relief on 7 December were all in their places, and the lighthouse buildings and everything at the stations was in order. Owing to the amount of sea, I could not get down to the landing place, but I got down to the crane platform 70 feet above the sea level. The crane originally erected on this platform was washed away during last winter, and the crane put up this summer was found to be unharmed, the jib lowered and secured to the rock, and the canvas covering the wire rope on the barrel securely lashed round it, and there was no evidence that the men had been doing anything at the crane. The mooring ropes, landing ropes, derrick landing ropes and crane handles, and also a wooden box in which they were kept and which was secured in a crevice in the rocks 70 feet up the tramway from its terminus and about 40 feet higher than the crane platform, or 110 feet in all above the sea level, had been washed away, and the ropes were strewn in the crevices of the rocks near the crane platform and entangled among the crane legs, but they were all coiled up, no single coil being found unfastened. The iron railings round the crane platform and from the terminus of the tramway to the concrete steps up from the west landing were displaced and twisted. A large block of stone had been dislodged from its position higher up and carried down to and left on the concrete path leading from the terminus of the tramway to the top of the steps. A life buoy fastened to the railings along this path to be used in case of emergency had disappeared, and I thought at first that it had been removed for the purpose of being used, but on examining the ropes by which it was fastened, I found that they had not been touched, and as pieces of canvas was adhering to the ropes, it was evident that the force of the sea pouring through the railings had, even at this great height, torn the life buoy off the ropes. When the accident occurred, Ducat was wearing sea boots and a waterproof, and Marshall, sea boots and oilskins, and as Moore assures me that the men only wore those articles when going down to the landings, that they must have intended when they left the station either to go down to the landing or the proximity of it. After a careful examination of the place, the railings, ropes, etc., and weighing all the evidence which I could secure, I am of the opinion that the most likely explanation of the disappearance of the men is that they had all gone down on the afternoon of Saturday, 15 December, to the proximity of the west landing to secure the box with the mooring ropes, etc., and that an unexpectedly large roller had come up on the island, and a large body of water going up higher than where they were and coming down upon them had swept them away with resistless force. I have considered and discussed the possibility of the men being blown away by the wind, but, as the wind was westerly, I am of the opinion, notwithstanding its great force, that the more probable explanation is that they have been washed away, as had the wind caught them, it would, from its direction, have blown them up the island, and I feel certain that they would have managed to throw themselves down before they reached the summit or brow of the island. On the conclusion of my inquiry on Saturday afternoon, I returned to Brestclete, wired the result of my investigations to the secretary, and called on the widows of James Ducat, the principal keeper, and Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper. I may state that as Moore was naturally very much upset by the unfortunate occurrence and appeared very nervous, I left Lamont on the island to go to the lightroom and keep Moore company when on watch for a week or two. If this nervousness does not leave Moore, he will require to be transferred, but I am reluctant to recommend this, as I would desire to have one man at least who knows the work of the station. The commissioners appointed Roderick Mackenzie, gamekeeper, to look out for daily signs that might be shown from the rock, and to note each night whether the light was seen or not seen. As it was evident that the light had not been lit from the 15th to the 25th December, I resolved to see him on Sunday morning, to ascertain what he had to say on the subject. He was away from home, but I found his two sons, ages about 16 and 18, two most intelligent lads of the gamekeeper class, who actually performed the duty of looking out for signals, and had a conversation with them on the matter, and I also examined the return book. From the December return, I saw that the tower itself was not seen, even with the assistance of a powerful telescope, between the 7th and the 29th December. The light was, however, seen on the 7th December, but was not seen on the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. It was seen on the 12th, but not seen again until the 26th, the night on which it was lit by Moore. Mackenzie stated, and I have since verified this, that the lights sometimes cannot be seen for 4 or 5 consecutive nights, but he was beginning to be anxious at not seeing it for such a long period, and had, for 2 nights prior to its reappearance, been getting the assistance of the natives to see if it could be discerned. Had the lookout been kept by an ordinary lightkeeper, I believe it would have struck the man ashore at an earlier period that something was amiss, and, while this would not have prevented the lamentable occurrence taking place, it would have enabled steps to have been taken to relight the light at an earlier date. I recommend that the signalman should be instructed that in future, should he fail to observe the light when, in his opinion, looking to the state of the atmosphere, it should be seen, he should be instructed to intimate this to the secretary when the propriety of taking steps could be considered. I may explain that the signals are shown from Flannan Islands by displaying balls or discs each side of the tower on poles projecting out from the lighthouse balcony, the signals being differentiated by one or more discs being shown on the different sides of the tower. When at Flannan Islands so lately as 7th December last, I had a conversation with the late Mr. Ducat regarding the signals, and he stated that he wished it would be necessary to hoist one of the signals just to ascertain how soon it would be seen ashore and how soon it would be acted upon. At that time, I took a note to consider the propriety of having a daily signal that all was well, signals under the present system only being exhibited when assistance of some kind is required. After carefully considering the matter and discussing it with the officials competent to offer an opinion on the subject, I arrived at the conclusion that it would not be advisable to have such a signal as, owing to the distance between the island and the shore, and to the frequency of haze on the top of the island, it would often be unseen for such a duration of time as to cause alarm, especially on the part of the keepers' wives and families. And I would point out that no day signals could have been seen between the 7th and 29th December, and an all-well signal would have been of no use on this occasion. The question has been raised as to how we would have been situated had wireless telegraphy been instituted, but had we failed to establish communication for some days, I should have concluded that something had gone wrong with the signalling apparatus, and that the last thing that would have occurred to me would have been that all three men had disappeared. In conclusion, I would desire to record my deep regret at such a disaster occurring to keepers in this service. I knew Ducat and Marshall intimately, and MacArthur the Occasional well. They were selected on my recommendation for the lighting of such an important station as Flannan Islands, and as it is always my endeavour to secure the best men possible for the establishment of a station, as the success and contentment at a station depends largely on the keepers present at its installation, this of itself is an indication that the board has lost two of its most efficient keepers. I was with the keepers for more than a month during the summer of 1899, when everyone worked hard to secure the early lighting of the station before winter, and, working along with them, I appreciated the manner in which they performed their work. I visited Flannan Isles when the relief was made so lately as 7th December, and have the melancholy recollection that I was the last person to shake hands with them and bid them adieu. Robert Muirhead, Superintendent, 8 July 1901. Some details differed between these reports, and the findings surely would not have brought any comfort to the families of the lost keepers. The reputation of the lighthouse was also tarnished for many years, the island itself already steeped in superstition. No bodies were ever found, though there were some sightings resulting in national speculation in newspapers and periodicals of the era. Stories arose of a sea serpent that had carried the men away, or that they had arranged for a ship to carry them away and start new lives. Some proposed that they had been abducted by foreign spies, or even met their fate at the malevolent hands of the crew of a ghost ship. More than 10 years later, the events were still being commemorated and elaborated on. Over time, more stories developed of logbook entries that had been found at the site. Written by Marshall, these supposedly indicated that on December 12, there were, quote, severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He also reported that Ducat had been very quiet, and Donald MacArthur, who was a veteran mariner with a reputation for brawling, had been crying. Log entries for December 13 were said to have stated that the storm was still raging, and that all three men had been praying. This was also puzzling, as they were experienced keepers who knew they were safely sheltered in a secure structure 150 feet above sea level. There were also no storms reported in the area any time on December 12, 13, or 14. The final log entry was said to have been written on December 15 and read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." An investigation carried out by Mike Dash, a journalist for the British monthly magazine The Fortean Times, revealed that the logbooks were entirely fictional. Further research into this mystery has taken into account the geography of the islands. The coastline of Isle and More is deeply indented with narrow gullies called geos. The West Landing, which is situated in such a formation, comes to an end within a cave. In high seas during storms, water would rush into the cave, then explode out again with considerable force. It is therefore possible MacArthur may have seen the incoming waves and rushed outside to warn his colleagues, only to be washed away with them. Other suggestions were based on the psychology of the keepers. Given that MacArthur was allegedly a volatile character, he may have instigated a fight near the landings or cliffs, and that caused the men to fall to their deaths. It was also discovered that Marshall was previously fined 5 shillings after his equipment was washed away during a gale. It is likely, in seeking to avoid another fine, that he and Ducat tried to secure their equipment and were swept away. And that is the tale of the mysterious disappearance of the Isle and More lighthouse keepers, a still unsolved event that inspired writing and film for decades to come. Don't forget, I stream 4 days a week over at twitch.tv/Jayborwocky, that's JAYBBERWOCKY. You can also show your support and help out the podcast by heading to patreon.com/Jayborwocky and signing up for one of the member tiers listed. Make sure to keep a weather eye out for announcements regarding future episodes. @HangnailPod is the official Twitter for the podcast, and all announcements will appear there. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you next time.